Hello, my sweet souls, and today I have a good story for you. Are you scared of dolls? Who wouldn't be? Now, this isn't the House of Dolls by Deify. This is actually House of Dolls by Objective Tell 6047. So sit back, grip your seats, and listen. I was recently diagnosed with automaphobia. That is a fear of human-looking figures, such as mannequins, wax figures, statues. You get it. The things that look human but are not quite human. Specifically, I have a fear of dolls. I don't mean like the Barbie lineup produced by toy companies, although they give me a slight discomfort. I mean old, creepy, porcelain dolls. My phobia has become severe enough that I could never allow any kind of dolls in the house, or let my daughter play with them. I'd buy her any toy she'd want, even if it's more meant for boys, but I'd never buy her dolls. Then suddenly, one got delivered to my house for my daughter's birthday. I found it sitting on the living room couch, staring at me like it had done that night all those years ago. My therapist has suggested that I should write down what happened to me so that I can start my recovery. I'm writing this down not knowing if it's still sitting in the same spot, or if it's moving and watching me. The story begins with an old woman who lived in my hometown years ago. She was, as my mom would politely describe her, eccentric. What made her that way was that she was always seen carrying an old antique doll everywhere she went. Sometimes she'd be seen carrying it over her shoulder. Other times she would push it around in an old rusty baby carriage. She would be seen around town and her house with her doll, not caring about the stares or the things people would say. Sometimes she would be seen talking to her doll, as if she thought it would talk back. One person described how they heard her yelling at her tiny voiceless companion from her house, as if it had broken some rule. No one believed she had a husband or children, or any living family left to care for her. Which explains why it took a couple weeks before someone found her dead in her house. A kind neighbor came to her property offering to cut her unkept lawn and help with much-needed house repairs. Getting no reply after knocking, he opened the unlocked door and found her lifeless in the middle of the floor. I heard she had been found with a look of absolute horror on her face, and her hand clutching her chest. The coroner decided she suffered a heart attack, but with no one else with her, she couldn't be taken to the hospital. Her house just outside of town was left empty after she had been moved to the morgue. No one knew what happened to her doll that she carried with her. One day, my friend and I were riding our bikes home after school and decided to check out the old woman's house. It was on the long way back from school. As far as anyone knew, she never willed the property to anyone, and the bank didn't own it either. So there it sat with no one claiming it, but really, who would want it? The structure was a two-story Bavarian-style house that sat on a large lawn that had grown so out of control that it was rather reminiscent of a small forest with its own ecosystem of plant and wildlife. The house looked like it had been painted white at some point, but weathering and stains had stripped it of its brightness. Vines and moss had taken a foothold on the front wooden porch. All the windows facing us were cracked and even broken. A section of the pointy roof was starting to collapse. With nature seeming to reclaim some lost land, the one thing that seemed out of place was the baby carriage the old woman used. It sat in the front yard, rusted from disuse, leaves gathering in the inside, and tears in the covering. My friend and I looked at the house from the sidewalk. It towered over us as it blocked the afternoon sun from its old, pointed rooftop. I knew there was no one inside, but I had a nagging feeling that the house itself was watching us. My friend was recounting to me some rumors that spread about the house after the old woman died. "They say her ghost still wanders the house, still talking to the doll," he told me. He also told me how he had heard the doll still sits somewhere in the house. I, meanwhile, kept looking at the house, and a movement caught my eye. A curtain on a second-floor window showed slight movement but looked like someone had parted it. I told my friend about it and he just made fun of me for seeing things. "I bet you couldn't spend all night in that place," he accused me with a sneer. "I could too if I wanted," I protested, always trying to be brave to my friend for some reason. "Sure thing, pussy," he said to me. You know the Back to the Future movies when Michael J. Fox got triggered when someone called him a chicken? Well, for me, being called a pussy was worse. I took him up on his dare, on the condition that I take pictures of the inside so he knew I wouldn't just run away. Later that night, I waited for my parents to fall asleep before sneaking out of the house. I quietly exited my room and down the hall back to the door, as it was more silent and farther away from my parents' room. I grabbed my bike and rode out of my neighborhood and eventually outside of town before I reached the old house. It seemed more menacing after dark. The old house was illuminated by the light of the moon. I placed my bike on the sidewalk and made my way to the old structure, observing the window on the second floor. The curtains remained still. I took my first pick of the house. I made my way through the large grass and finally made it to the porch. My foot leaned on the first step, causing a large creak that echoed throughout the yard. I pressed forward to the front door. It had an old-fashioned knocker in the middle. It had the shape of an eagle, its wings open in flight. It may have been bronze, but time had rusted it to a dirty brown with chipping paint. I reached for the door handle and, surprisingly, it turned. Weird, I thought. They probably would have locked this door. However, since no one would take this place, why would it be locked? I opened the door to see a darkened entryway. My phone had a flashlight app, so I reached for it immediately to turn it on. The entryway led to a long, dark hallway with an open room at the end of it. The floor was covered in dust and trash. My flashlight had exposed some rats and insects hiding in the filth. The part of the floor that wasn't covered in trash showed a flower-patterned carpet. Its color had long since faded. To my left of the entryway was an ascending staircase. To my right, there was a smaller room that I think was the parlor. The room was empty aside from some closed windows and furniture that was covered. The floor wasn't as littered in here as it was in the hallway, so I could see another old flower-patterned carpet. The exposed wood was old and splintered, and I snapped a few pics on my phone. I walked out of the parlor and back into the entryway. I stood over the middle of the floor. This was supposedly the spot where the old woman was found. The silence of a lifeless house had surrounded me. I pressed forward down the dark hallway. There were several paintings on the walls. They looked like portraits. The old lady featured frequently in them. After a few steps, I found myself stepping on something hard yet flexible as it squished under my shoe. Then, I heard a faint but very unmistakable high voice say one word below me. "Mama!" Either the word or voice caused me to freeze in place. I looked below me to see the source of the noise. I found a lonely baby doll lying on top of the litter. It had synthetic blonde hair and a dirty pinkish dress. I picked it up to inspect it. It was about the size of my phone. It had dirt and filth covering its face and clothing, its pink dress losing color. The face had suffered the most damage. There was a large tear in its plastic face, the scar showing the hollow inside of the head. I squeezed it again and it gave out another "Mama!" The voice box still operating but very faint and muffled. I placed the doll back on the floor after taking another picture of it. Further down the hall I went. The room at the end turned out to be a larger kitchen-dining room mix. The stovetop was covered in a layer of dust and grease from never being washed. The table was covered in a white cloth with dirty dishes on top of it. I found another doll sitting in a chair at the end of the table. This one was wearing an old sailor's uniform. It looked more male than the first one I saw in the hallway. I walked to the sink to find pots and pans flooding it. There was a layer of filthy, stagnant water underneath them from the amount of food matter and mold accumulating at the bottom. The pots and pans were never washed, food matter and grease being caked into them. The sink smelled terrible, like as bad as it looked. I took another picture of the room before leaving. Outside the kitchen, I found a closed wooden door. I opened it to find an old, very unclean bathroom. The tub and sink, both of which were supposed to be white, had yellow stain and mold inside the receptacles. The worst thing, however, was the toilet, which looked like the stuff of nightmares. Dried fecal matter covered the inside as it was drained of all water. To this day, I can't use anybody else's bathroom without thinking about this mess. I quickly shut the door while trying to keep myself from vomiting from the sight and stench of that bathroom. I stood outside and waited for the feeling of nausea to pass. Then, I heard a sound. The house itself was dead quiet until now, with nobody else here but me. But I could make out the sound of something creaking upstairs in a room above me. I know old houses make noises like creaky floorboards, drafty spaces, and maybe rats in the walls. This, though, sounded deliberate, like there was a rhythm to it. It went back and forth. I walked back down the hallway toward the staircase, shining my light up to the darkened second floor. The creaking sounded much louder from where I was standing. It was coming from up there. I should have left at that moment and forgot the whole thing, but instead I pressed upward, trying to be brave myself. The carpeted stairs made a muffled creaking sound as I climbed up. Total darkness greeted me as I went up further. Not just darkness, but a pitch-black void with no discernible shapes. I reached the top of the stair and turned my light onto the second-floor hallway. This one was a lot shorter than the main hall downstairs. There were 3 rooms, with the first 2 being closed. The one to my right was slightly open, and I could hear the creaking coming from in there. I began to tense, and my eyes widened. My heart was thundering in my chest. I was beginning to think that someone was here. Maybe it was some homeless person or junkie who had no other place to go. That didn't seem possible because it looked like there were no signs of anybody living here. I started to have the idea that the old woman's ghost was in the room, waiting for me. I apprehensively approached the open door. I got close enough to peer through the crack in the doorway. I peeked through the crack to see the source of the noise, and my heart felt like lurching out of my chest from what I saw. I could only make out part of the room through the slight opening. I could see the window with the moon shining outside, and an object moving back and forth across my sight as it sat in front of the window. It looked like an old rocking chair moving on its own, the back facing me. I opened the door to get a better view and make sure my eyes weren't fooling me. Sure enough, it was a rocking chair that still looked in good condition with its smooth wood and paint that didn't peel. As the door opened fully, the rocking chair suddenly stopped, giving some slight swing as its momentum came to a grinding halt. When it stopped, so did the creaking. I paused, debating whether I should approach the old chair. It looked like no one was sitting in it. How could a rocking chair move on its own? I walked towards the chair, bracing for whoever might be sitting in it. I didn't find a homeless person, a junkie, or a ghost, but it definitely wasn't empty. Another doll. This one was a porcelain doll about the size of a 5-year-old. It had painted brown hair and painted freckled dirt covering its face, which was illuminated by the moon. It was dressed in a small suit that had tears in it. I wanted to take a picture of it. I reached for my phone, but when I turned the camera on, the image kept getting fuzzy no matter how hard I adjusted it. Finally, I went in to inspect it. It was the creepiest thing I had ever seen. Its pale blue eyes, though motionless, seemed to have followed my face. The doll was utterly motionless. I thought there was no way that it could have moved the chair on its own. I poked it to feel what it was made of. The torso was stuffed with cotton or feathers. The porcelain head was the only thing that had any weight to it. Still not enough to move the rocking chair the way it moved. I decided to check out the rest of the room, trying to put that creepy-ass doll out of my mind. This looked like a playroom. There were games all around, more toys than I'd ever seen, and books filling a whole shelf. It looked like this room hasn't been used in years. To the far side was an old dresser with a mirror attached to it. The wood was painted a dark blue, but may as well have been black for the minimal amount of light in there. The mirror was covered in a thick layer of dust, like it had snow all over the glass. I took my hand to wipe the surface of the dust. The room was a lot clearer in the mirror now. Then my eyes turned back to the rocking chair and I froze. Fear coursing like an electric charge through my nervous system. My body became covered in goose pimples and my hair standing straight up. There's no way it should have moved. There's no reason for it to move its head to face me. But that's exactly what it did. Its head turned in my direction to look in the mirror. Its reflection was looking back at me. I quickly turned around, the doll now directly facing me. The face seemed to have changed into a glare, as if it considered me an intruder in its world. Then I saw it moving again. The rocking was slight at first and silent. Then, as the momentum picked up, the creaking came back as the legs rocked across the rickety floor. This was the part I decided to get the fuck out of there. I looked at the open door to see how far it was. Only a few feet, but it may as well have been a whole mile. I moved my eyes back to the doll, making sure it didn't do anything else. As I got closer to the door, I got farther out of the doll's sight. Maybe I could leave without it moving, or at least I thought I could until the chair turned around, creating a loud screech that reverberated through the room. The doll looked directly at me again. I hurried out of the room and slammed the door behind me, shoving my body weight against the door to keep it barricaded. My heart pounded as adrenaline and fear circulated in my blood. Sweat covered my forehead as my body heated up. I felt like I must run, but fear wouldn't let me. I was trying to recuperate when I heard the jiggling of rusted metal coming from my side. The doorknob. It was trying to open the door. It was unsuccessful at opening, but that's what it was trying to do to get me. It continued for a few seconds before it stopped completely. I took the chance and got the hell out of there. I ran down the stairs, nearly tripping on the final step as I ran to the door. It was blocked by another porcelain doll, sitting in the entryway while it blocked my way out. This doll had a clown face with a hobo outfit. Fear had kept me from moving or kicking the doll aside to run out. My panic spiked again as I heard the door from upstairs open, and the sound of tiny footsteps were running down the stairs. I had to hide. Where? I frantically searched the darkened room for anywhere to hide. I found one door straight ahead as I peered through the darkness. I bolted for it and slammed the door behind me, pressing my head against the wood. I couldn't hear the footsteps. Silence. Sweet silence. I resolved to calm down and then find a way out. I turned my back to the door and turned on my light to see the room I was in. True terror filled my being as I tried to scream, but it ended up being caught in my throat. More dolls. Shelves and shelves of them. Various sizes, designs, and colors. This was a whole storage room full of them. They were all in various states of disrepair. Some were missing eyes, limbs, or heads. Others were covered in dirt and filth. The biggest one was another clown doll in orange clothes and blue hair with black eyes in front of me. I checked each of them until movement caught my eye. One of them turned its head towards me, then another. Then one with no eyes started looking at me. Then they were all looking at me. They were all looking at me. I ran out of the room to find some escape. I didn't remember seeing any other door going outside while exploring, so that left only the front door, which has the clown doll sitting in front of it. With no other way, I ran to my only exit, picked up the doll, and threw it so hard I heard it break into pieces as I bolted out the entryway and into the front yard. I got to my bike in no time, then rode off. I swear I heard multiple footsteps behind me. I rode so fast I felt like I was flying, never once slowing down to catch my breath. I didn't stop until I reached the stoplight on my block, and then decided to brave one look behind me. Nothing. I wasn't followed by anything. I still rode back to the safety of my house and locked myself in my room all night, always peering through my curtain. Daylight didn't come fast enough. I never spoke to my friend after that night, and I did not want to be around dolls for any length of time. I also avoided that house completely until the day that old shithole got demolished. Hopefully. So was everything inside it. Even with that, I still had a sense of paranoia that one of those dolls would find me and show up at my doorstep. It turned out, one of them did. It was my daughter's 8th birthday. A package came with her name on it, but no return address. It did have a plain card on it with only 2 words: "Happy birthday." She opened it up to reveal the same doll from the room upstairs all those years ago. Its appearance cleaner than before, looking brand new in fact. Seeing that damn thing sent me into an anxiety attack so bad, I locked myself for 2 days in our bedroom. My wife, who used to find my fear of dolls amusing, now showed genuine concern for me. She told our daughter to keep the doll in her room. I never saw it do anything after that, making me think that I probably hallucinated the whole thing. Maybe. If it weren't for one thing. I installed a nanny cam in our daughter's bedroom, and I keep as close an eye on it as I can. It'll usually be facing the wall, but whenever I turn my gaze away, even for a split second, its head turns towards the camera, looking at me through the other side of the lens.